Hi, everybody. Unfortunately, we weren't able to record the first part of the Future Decker conversation, Sustainable Homes. And so we're doing it again, part two, with our incredible guest speaker, Kat Eshel. And so I'll do a brief overview as to what the conversations are, why we're having this in the first place, and then I'll let Kat take it away and speak a little bit about deep energy retrofits and the city's plan for achieving our climate goals. And so my name is Wandy Pascual. I'm a Housing Innovation Design Fellow with both the BSA and the City of Boston's Mayor's Housing Innovation Lab. The two have been working together for over the past 5 years to think creatively around our issues of housing in the City of Boston and how we can make it more affordable for folks. And so the BSA, on one hand, providing this perspective around architecture in the built environment, and having a large membership of folks that have truly been able to partner with residents and other city stakeholders to creatively tackle these issues. And the Mayor's Housing Innovation Lab, stemming from our Housing a Changing City plan, and really taking a look at how we can provide affordable housing options for people in the City of Boston. And so we, for the past year, have been exploring this idea around a future decker. And so a future decker is essentially a new rendition of the iconic New England triple decker, right? And so we know that this is a building type that has really allowed for a lot of folks to be able to call Boston home, whether through home ownership opportunities or even rental ones for over 100 years now. And we've been having community conversations with folks and residents about their experiences with triple deckers, right? And then also asking them to envision the future of this building type. And so we have our past, present, future decker virtual exhibition, which is live on the BSA website. And in order to delve a little bit deeper into the issues around triple deckers, we've been having a series of conversations. Our first was really an opportunity to bring our different partners that have made this work possible to sit down and have a conversation around how they've encountered the virtual exhibition, but also where they see this work going and moving forward. Really understanding as well that we had initially thought about holding this in person, right? And recognizing the current realities that we're all navigating through. And now we're hoping to delve a little bit deeper around the intersection of climate, health, and triple deckers by having this conversation with our guest speakers around what are some of the challenges that come along with conducting deep energy retrofits, and what are some of the opportunities as well. And so this was our initial agenda, and I'll transition over to Kat, who will be able to speak and provide this overview as to how the City of Boston has really been thinking about tackling these issues. And so without further ado, I will pass the remote control to Kat Eshel.
Hello, thank you so much for that introduction, Wandy. So as Wandy mentioned, I work in the City of Boston Mayor's Office of Energy, Environment, and Open Space on our carbon neutrality programs. I'm going to walk through a little bit of how climate change affects Boston here today and what we're doing about it, and how triple deckers fit into that. In terms of climate change in Boston, we know that it's here, it's happening now. We're already seeing the effects of climate change. Carbon emissions from cities and towns and people all across the globe are changing our climate and causing sea level rise, extreme heat, and stormwater flooding in Boston. And I showed some images that folks might remember from storms in recent years. There was a blizzard in 2015 that caused serious amounts of flooding near the Aquarium T-stop, which you can see photographed here on the right at the top. And then some sunny day flooding happening in Dorchester near Tinian Beach. So during a sunny day flood during a king tide just 2.5 weeks ago. And so we're already seeing the effects of climate change and already seeing sea level rise here in Boston. And we know that climate change is disproportionately affecting communities of color and socially vulnerable populations in Boston. So that can include women, children, youth, older Bostonians, as well as folks with disabilities or with chronic illnesses. So that's why we have set two goals. The first is to make sure that Boston is a resilient, climate-ready city, that we're able to withstand the impacts of climate change. But the second is also to make sure that we're taking responsibility for our own contribution to climate change and becoming a carbon neutral city by 2050. In terms of where our emissions come from, our emissions are about 70% from buildings and 30% from transportation. What you can see here is the 70% from buildings, and about half is from really larger buildings and large institutions, commercial buildings, and very large residential. But about 20% comes from smaller buildings, smaller residential buildings, up to 4, 6, 8, 10 units. And that's where triple deckers are. In terms of how we're doing in terms of decarbonizing, we've actually been doing a lot of work on climate since 2005. Our first climate action plan came out in 2007, and we've updated it several times over the years. And we've been working to cut our emissions since 2007. And we've made a lot of progress. We've cut our emissions by about 20% since 2005. And so that's that dot that you see here. So we've come down from just under 8 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent per year to just above 6 million. So we've made a lot of progress, but we aren't on track to meeting our long-term goal of becoming carbon neutral by 2050. And that would be the red line that you see here, sort of our straight line if we want to get to 2050. And so what this means is that while we've made a lot of progress, we still need to accelerate the rate at which we're reducing emissions if we want to get on track in order to get to carbon neutrality by 2050. So when the mayor made this commitment to carbon neutrality by 2050, back in 2017, the first question that he asked was, well, how do we get there? And so he commissioned a report that was developed by the Boston University Institute for Sustainable Energy to undertake a technical analysis that would seek to understand the potential impacts of various policies and strategies to decarbonize Boston's economy. So we looked at 4 sectors: buildings, transportation, waste, and energy. And those results then informed the development of the 2019 Climate Action Plan update. And that was a year-long planning effort that sought to identify and start mapping out what success looks like for some high priority strategies to accelerate the rate at which we are reducing emissions to get on track to becoming carbon neutral by 2050. When they looked at our building stock, they did an assessment of everything that's in place now and everything that will be built. So everything, all the square footage that exists already is what you see in yellow here. And then there is some square footage that's going to be built in the future. But one of the takeaways was that 85% of the square footage that will be around in 2050 has already been built. So while it's very important to think about new buildings, we also need to make sure that we're doing everything that we can to get all of these existing buildings to cut their carbon emissions as well. In terms of where triple deckers fit into this picture, right here you have single family, here you have large multifamily, and in the middle you have small multifamily. So a lot of our square footage in Boston is made up of these sort of smaller buildings, so 2 to 8, 10 units. That's where a lot of our square footage is for our housing. And then they also account for their own part of the emissions. A slightly smaller proportion of our global emissions come from these small buildings, but there's still a big opportunity here. And we know that there's a lot of people living in these buildings, so there's a lot of benefits to this work that can go towards them as well. The work to decarbonize a building can also result in a healthier building. In terms of the number of triple deckers, we have about 14,000 triple deckers in the city, 13,700. And we know that about 40% of them are owner occupied based on an assessment that a member of my team did in 2018 looking at our assessors database. So about 13,700 triple deckers, 40% of are owner occupied. And that's a huge opportunity because it means that they are incentivized to do the same work into their building to make it clean and efficient because they themselves are going to benefit from that work. It's much easier to justify the cost of replacing your roof, putting in sort of bumping up the insulation in your weatherization, if you yourself are going to be able to enjoy the comfort that comes from doing that work afterwards. Another feature about triple deckers in Boston is that there's a lot of oil and gas heating in these buildings. Oil in particular is prevalent in environmental justice communities, and so there's a real benefit here to thinking about changing what kinds of energy systems we use, shifting away from oil and natural gas and towards clean fuels like electricity. There's a benefit there in terms of air quality, as well as trying to make sure that costs are going down if you're switching from oil to electricity in particular. And then the last big opportunity in triple deckers from sort of this 30,000 foot view is that a lot of triple deckers, a lot of them have rooftops that are sloped, but some of them, and actually quite a number of them, have flat rooftops. And those rooftops are about 30 to 40 feet, and those can take solar panels. And they can produce a lot of the electricity that might be used within a triple decker. So there's a real opportunity there to think about efficiency. Because owners live in those buildings, there's an opportunity there because their incentives are aligned with those of their tenants. There's an opportunity to switch fuels because there's a lot of them that currently are on oil and gas. And there's an opportunity to make sure that we're running on clean electricity and to deploy solar power. In terms of our strategies to retrofit Boston's buildings, we're doing a couple of different things. So the 2019 Climate Action Plan update was really about accelerating the rate at which we're cutting our emissions. And so if you recall, a few slides ago, I showed a pie chart of where our emissions come from, and about half was from really large buildings. And so as we're thinking about accelerating emissions reductions, we wanted to talk about those large buildings first, because they're contributing disproportionately to the problem of our carbon emissions right now. So that's why a really big policy piece that we're working on is developing mandatory carbon targets for existing large buildings. But we know that those aren't the only buildings in town. There's a lot of these smaller buildings that are out there. And so we also want to make sure that we're thinking about them and thinking about how they're also going to be able to be part of decarbonizing Boston's economy. One of the things that we're doing is developing a resource hub for building owners and residents to connect them with the right kinds of financing depending on what kind of building they have, and to be providing them with one-on-one support. So trying to hold people's hands through this process. A lot of folks aren't really familiar with what it means to decarbonize a building. And so it's about providing case studies and guidance so that they have a sense of what it looks like for their kind of building. The third piece is that we're also partnering with affordable housing providers to demonstrate retrofit technologies. So we're actively looking for case studies to keep learning from one another about what kinds of technologies have worked well, what haven't, if there was something in how the project was conducted that resulted in a better outcome, so that we can sort of take those learnings and make them into case studies and make that information available to others who want to do this work as well. The final piece is that we're going to be working on developing design guidelines for deep energy retrofits. And this is building on some existing work that the Boston Planning and Development Agency is doing around flood resilience design guidelines. And I actually took the image that they included in their report about triple deckers specifically, showing some long-term strategies to think about sea level rise and resilience to flooding. And it shows all the different kinds of interventions that they might consider. So whether that's wet flood proofing or dry flood proofing, if they need to elevate their mechanicals, if they need to think about protecting their critical systems. And so in that same way, we would want to take the different components of buildings and what it means to switch them to being carbon neutral. So thinking about the opportunities to deploy solar panels, to increase weatherization, to do air sealing, to switch out an old oil boiler and instead switch to a heat pump system. Just so that folks have a sense of the different components that make up a carbon neutral building, and also think about the other features. So what if they're thinking about trying to make their building both resilient and carbon neutral? How does that work together? So lots of pieces moving, but it's a little bit of sort of where we're headed in this climate work and what to expect over the next couple of years in this space. And with that, I'll turn it over to Galen Nelson. Take it away, Galen.
Of these structures But the more I've thought about this, and I care a lot about historic preservation as well, but the more I've thought about these 100-year-old structures, really the best way to preserve these structures, their beauty, their sensitivity to to community, their support for community, their practicalities, to upgrade them for the 21st century. We don't want triple deckers to become kind of carbon heavy relics of the past and to become obsolete. So if we can identify ways to retrofit them sensitively and cost effectively, I think that'll be our best shot at actually preserving this really important housing typology. And also, frankly, a way to improve occupant health, comfort, and build wealth in our communities. Thanks, Wandy. So what does that high efficiency electric home look like of 2025 or beyond? And this could be a triple decker, it could be a single family, frankly, or a larger multifamily. But you'll see a lot of, not every home will have these features in 2025 or farther into the future. But we and many other clean energy and climate observers believe that we'll see many of these elements or components in many homes of the future, including, I think, some of the components and elements that get a lot of attention for good reasons, but perhaps a bit more than they should, like solar PV, but less attention paid to really effective air sealing and insulating, or weatherization as it's commonly called. And then the introduction of newer technologies, electrified heating and cooling systems, whether they're heat pumps, air source heat pumps, or ground source heat pumps, induction stoves, so getting natural gas and other fossil fuel combustion out of our homes that will both reduce energy costs for building occupants, but also really improve occupant health. And then, of course, thinking about the transportation side as well, right? We tend to think about transportation separately, but I think we all acknowledge that we generally park vehicles, in our driveways and sometimes in our garages, and we need to provide charging infrastructure for those vehicles. So these are simply some of the components that we'll likely see in these homes of the future. Next slide. But unfortunately, we often see those kind of stylized, glossy visions of the future, but this is really our reality right now in triple deckers and in many existing small to mid-sized multifamilies. Difficult existing conditions that present some fairly serious barriers to performing the type of energy retrofits that we need to perform in order to achieve these deep energy reductions, as well as the electrification of our buildings. And so just quickly, starting at the top left and going counterclockwise, that's knob and tube wiring, actually mixed in with some contemporary wiring, but that white object in the middle is actually a ceramic post, which used to support uninsulated wiring. That's how homes were wired, and you can find the remnants of that infrastructure in many of our older stick-built homes. That equipment infrastructure needs to be pulled out before you do insulating and other work in the home. So that's one barrier. Moving down, that's just a crowded joist bay, a ceiling joist bay in a basement, which is fine if everything is working functionally, but presents a fairly serious logistical barrier if you're a builder trying to insulate that space and work around it. On the lower right, there's some existing insulation, a mix of a couple different types of insulation, maybe perlite, looks like some fiberglass bats there, in a very small crawl space, so difficult to conduct air sealing work after a building has already been poorly or under insulated, and difficult confined space to work in generally. Above it is an example of a kind of existing pudding stone and rubble foundation wall in a typical basement. So again, presents challenges to controlling moisture and insulating and air sealing basements. And then finally, I think my favorite image, this one on the upper right, of the plenum, or the space between the ceiling on the third floor of a triple decker and the roof deck. again, a really tight quarters, really difficult. If you can't, it's too small to send a human in there to insulate anyway, maybe a robot. But you can also see, I think, generations of infrastructure there. On the lower left, that is old BX wiring. The lower right, that is newer Romex electrical wiring. And then in the middle, believe it or not, natural gas supply lines for that would have supplied lighting, natural gas lighting in the room below it. So three eras of energy source for lighting in that particular room. So those are some of the existing conditions that we need to overcome. So next slide. So how are we addressing this challenge? What did we do at the Mass Clean Energy Center to begin to tackle this? Well, we developed this triple-decker design challenge. We knew that in order to focus attention on this housing typology, to bring the best of what Boston, the region, and indeed the nation, we had some applicants from around the country submit compelling proposals to us, to the challenge. We wanted to challenge the community to develop replicable, scalable retrofit approaches for existing triple deckers. A lot of design competitions focus on new construction. I would posit that the large majority of them do so. So we took on a tougher challenge by attempting to focus design expertise on existing buildings, and in this case, triple deckers. And we're really, really happy by the responses that we received. There were 2 tracks in the design competition, a straight up retrofit of the existing 3 units, and a second track in which we invited applicants to contemplate the addition of another unit or units to an existing triple decker. And the rendering, I should give credit to Boston-based Place Taylor. The rendering on the upper right is just a kind of a schematic version of a rendering of what a 4-level triple decker, one might call it a quad, might look like. And then we had a variety of prizes that we'll be offering. And so the competition is actually underway. We received 13 proposals. We were really, really happy with the quality of the proposals that we received. We're in the evaluation phase now, so unfortunately I can't talk about, there are no winners to be announced tonight, and I can't talk about any of the particular applicants, but I did want to just quickly, as I close out my remarks, highlight some of the elements and components that that applicants brought to this competition, some of which we expected and some of which we were pleasantly surprised by. And just suffice it to say that I think you will all be very pleased, those of us who work in climate and clean energy work, and I think, you know, regular citizens, homeowners, whether you've lived in a triple decker or not, will really appreciate the creativity and thoughtfulness and innovation that a wide variety of applicants, including some very small firms to some of the most well-known larger design firms in Boston, brought to this challenge. So a lot of the applicants thought about the opportunity to add an additional unit and how that could change the project economics and provide additional revenue streams to owner occupants. And as Kat noted, owner occupants of triple deckers in Boston, at least, comprise a fairly wide variety of demographics across our city. We asked applicants to consider the embodied carbon in building materials. That is the carbon content, literally, of the building materials that they're planning to use, as a way to begin to trigger more critical thinking about the materials that we're using to retrofit our buildings. And we were really delighted to see, again, the very creative and innovative approaches to addressing that challenge. A lot of applicants, they did fully electrify. We actually required that, so we had to see fully electric proposals, but we were very happy by the variety of approaches that we saw. We were happy that a couple of applicants had very creative approaches to addressing the tenant-landlord split incentive, which is a kind of a fancy term for this notion that if you're a tenant, you have no interest in investing in the property because you're only paying rent, although you are paying for your energy costs. And if you're an owner, you have little incentive to invest in the property because you're not paying the energy costs for the tenant, and that is that there's a split incentive there. So how does one identify a solution to overcoming that challenge, which is a barrier to upgrading and electrifying many of our buildings? Some of the proposals included really creative applications of green space, lots of experimentation with new panelized and modular approaches to triple deckers and construction generally. So I won't go on, but again, we were really happy with the proposals, and we will be inviting the community, including all of you, to weigh in on the People's Choice Award. You know, I think we all were recently reminded how important voting is. You know, we'd love you to to weigh in and vote on our People's Choice Award when we make that public on our website at masscec.com. So I will end there. I really look forward to the discussion. Hope you learned a little bit about Mass CEC and how we're trying to address triple deckers and the challenge of retrofitting them and other multifamily homes. And I guess I should finally add that we've worked very closely with the City of Boston. Are really happy with that partnership, both on this project and so many others. So it's good to know that the state is working and coordinating very closely with the city with regard to clean energy and climate.
Thanks so much, Galen, for providing that overview as well. And without further ado, I'll pass it to Corey.
Good evening, everyone, and I'm thrilled to be here, to say the least. And I wanted to share our views at Mobius on workforce development and a vision of an inclusive community where all of these different forms of future deckers, medium to small size units can make an impact on workforce development in the city as a way to bridge community, workforce development, and climate issues that we face. Next slide. Now, when we think of equity, we think even throughout all communities, but equity really is about equality, and equality in how all of these different communities can be challenged by the lack of or very tight resources for making change within the communities that we live in. Next slide. Now, creating and keeping the workforce diverse is a key factor for all of us, and as we look at this challenge that we are faced with the climate and triple deckers in the community and in the city. And for this reason, I really feel like we're all working in silos, and if we can come together and work on these challenges that face us all through specific designs, layouts, and workforce issues can be addressed through coming together. Next slide. And examples of that is through ACEEE. They have workforce development learning groups that are making it easier for individuals to participate in programs that can get them into a strong career path in a very short period of time, 5 to 7 months. And that was a program that was started in November of this year. And we can build resilience through those efforts and, you know, create a much more inclusive city by adding these particular elements to the workforce and addressing climate change at the same time. Next slide. Now, how do we do that? And this is going back to some of the work that was touched on by previous panelists. And, you know, homes are a low-hanging fruit. Homes have these great opportunities to build jobs like insulation and the wraparound situations where that the technology that we have today can be implemented in a lot of these triple-decker units, and utilizing the workforce that is existing and expand on them. Because over the years I've been working with as a general contractor, as a single family home remodeler, we really didn't have enough of the skilled laborers to deploy into some of these very specific type of jobs. So it lends itself well to increased training, work viability that can not just help the climate, but also build the communities around us to increase the amount of workforce efforts that that we have now in the city. And so I'm very excited about what opportunities lay within the challenge that of the triple decker, the retrofitting homes. You know, as a single family builder, you know, you want to keep the integrity of the layout and the space without losing square footage when we increase the insulation wraparounds. And that was one of the major challenges that we were able to work with. And within that, it helped through finding and creating great relationships with institutions like RCC, BFIT, Benjamin Franklin Institute Technology. These are existing institutions that are helping by producing new students and individuals that have the skills to do the type of work that's out there. So once we can get it all together and come together as the community and build on the topics build on the efforts that everyone else had, we can create a much brighter future. Next slide. Next slide. So I really want to stop on this particular moment and show how workforce, communities, triple deckers, and new construction can work all together. In this slide that we have here, we are looking at 3 triple deckers nestled between some new work that was able to create work and job opportunities throughout the community. And the triple decker itself can also work within a new scheme that we are here at our Mobius LLC trying to create within the community that are existing here in Dorchester. Now, working with the existing stock and creating new stock that will work together. And you know, it's just an opportunity for us all to come together, provide services and jobs that individuals can be very proud of. Thank you.
Thank you so much for also speaking to that a little bit more. I'm trying to figure out a way to stop sharing my screen. So here we go. There we go. And maybe now we can sort of take a look at who's in the room, but I just want to take a moment and allow this all to sort of marinate in everybody's minds and just say truly thank you to all of you for speaking to this and shining a light on the sort of challenges, but also opportunities that exist to conducting deep energy retrofits to triple deckers and other small to middle scale housing forms in the city and beyond. I have my own series of questions that I'm sort of like eager to ask of all of you. And I am holding sort of like the fact that you all mentioned this need for case studies and for examples to actually be out there that we can point to and say, this exists, this is possible, and it's something that we can continue to do. And also holding the notion that collaboration is key and is essential to making sure that we're achieving the goals that we have in mind. And so I think, Kat, I'm actually really curious about the resource hub that you mentioned. And I'm wondering, right, Galen, Corey, are these also sort of things that you knew about that, you know of folks that are also accessing this? But I would love to hear from you, Kat. What is the Resource Hub?
Absolutely. So the Resource Hub is a bit of a new initiative, and it's starting small and it's going to grow. But so where we're starting is that there just came in all of our conversations with building owners as we're developing this new policy to set carbon targets for existing large buildings. We were talking to a lot of our buildings that already report their energy use to us every year, and every 5 years they have to do something. It's a policy that's called BERDA, the Building Energy Reporting and Disclosure Ordinance. And some of the feedback that we were getting was that it's sometimes very difficult to navigate all of the different programs that are available out there for building owners to take advantage of. There's resources that are available from Mass Save, the utility efficiency investment program, but also Mass CEC occasionally has different pots of money that become available. There's sort of programs that have been launched at the national scale, like LIHEAP and weatherization assistance programs. So there's just, and then there's also the world of tax credits. So there's a lot of different elements to navigate, and we found that really big buildings, so buildings that are part of large institutions or property owners that hold property in many cities, those are really sophisticated actors. They know how to navigate sort of the complicated smorgasbord of incentives and financing that might be out there. They're really sophisticated consumers of sort of the building sector's up-to-date information. Whereas when we start thinking about buildings that are much smaller, when you get to buildings that are 35 units, 20 units, maybe 15 units, you're increasing the likelihood that we're talking about a property owner, that maybe they don't have sort of the technology and the know-how in order to understand what it means to retrofit their building and what kinds of programs are already available for them to take advantage of. So some of it is just going to be sort of baseline education, looking at a building's emissions profile and sort of saying like, hey, you're getting this amount of your energy from here, this amount from here. Have you considered purchasing clean electricity? That's going to bring your emissions down. Have you done the analysis to look at putting solar on your roof? Have you ever done, what's your most recent building energy audit? Let's look at the different technologies, how old they are. Were you already planning on replacing this technology? Potentially there's an opportunity to plug in there. So kind of having more of a conversation with them and just holding folks' hands a little bit more. Decarbonization it's complicated, but once you start breaking out into its components, it becomes a lot simpler. We're talking about efficiency, fuel switching, so taking appliances that use fossil fuels and switching them to appliances that don't, and then buying clean electricity. So the Resource Hub, it's intended to sort of be a one-stop shop so that we can sort of connect them to those other resources in a way that's appropriate for that building, rather than sort of listing out all the resources and being like, you go figure it out. So one-on-one support, we're also hoping we're going to be working on developing guidance, so kind of design guidelines as to sort of what a standard kind of retrofit could look like for different kinds of buildings, hence the importance of case studies. But also thinking about how this integrates with all of our other priorities. So I mentioned resilience. There's also things like historic preservation. If a building is landmarked or you want to be able to preserve its architectural features, thinking about strategies that those buildings can take as well in order to decarbonize their buildings while also sort of holding that character and preserving that history. That's going to be another component of it. But lots more to be developed. We're also hoping to make sure that it's really well integrated with all the other programs that the city already offers. So obviously there's the Boston Home Center, which is a great resource for residents that can come into play. There's also the Boston Public Health Commission. they've been developing this program called Breathe Easy at Home, where hospitals can actually directly refer patients with respiratory problems to the Public Health Commission, where then the Public Health Commission can conduct an inspection and essentially help identify any problems in their built environment, in their indoor environment, that could be exacerbating respiratory conditions. So how can we better integrate with all the great work that's already happening and not reinvent the wheel, but making sure that we're just being a resource for building owners and residents that are interested in seeing how their building can decarbonize.
Thanks, Kat, for sharing a little bit more about that. I think that it's definitely truly important to make sure that folks know where to access these resources and that they're not sort of going to different places and spreading themselves too thin when it comes to really being aware as to what is out there. And so I'd actually like to open the floor up for discussion, whether the panelists have questions for one another, or if other folks here in this space would want to unmute and maybe be on camera if you are comfortable doing that, but would love to hear from you. I think that's something that we have truly wanted to center in these conversations, is the role and the importance of storytelling and how we can share our own stories about our lived experiences, especially if you've lived in a triple decker and have sort of, you know, come to firsthand experience of understanding what the different challenges are to sort of allow for these to be sustainable, or if you've worked on these projects yourselves, right, and have sort of had to navigate these complex systems that Kat was just alluding to. And so, yeah, feel free to come off mute and ask those questions of the panelists as well.
I actually
yes,
have a question. Oh, go ahead.
I just have a question for you, Galen. This is Anatol Zuckerman, architect. You mentioned the competition for retrofitting triple decker. Are they any competition for the new triple deckers?
We're not doing that at this time. And I know that in the past, the city of Boston has managed their E-positive program, but that's probably currently closed. Kat, I assume you could confirm that. But so there have been similar efforts to focus on high performance, small multifamily buildings. But no, we're focused squarely on with this competition on identifying replicable and scalable models for existing triple deckers.
All right, just existing. All right. So, well, in 2014, I designed several new triple deckers and showed it to the Boston Society of Architects, and now they invited me to this forum to discuss it. So I did not know that that we're going to discuss only renovation.
I will say, absolutely. While we're kind of focusing on the triple decker of the present today, part of the future decker exhibit is also imagining the future decker and what triple deckers could look like. So I think that the project that you did in 2014 was probably its own version of reimagining what a triple decker could look like with today's building codes. And that's really exciting. Obviously, existing buildings are a big piece of the pie, but it's also really important to move towards net zero new construction. In Massachusetts, we have a building code that's set at the state level, so most of our efforts within the city of Boston, we're really focused on how can we use our zoning code in order to move towards a net zero standard for new buildings. There's an ongoing process at the Boston Planning and Development Agency to think about how we can update our green building zoning requirements. So I'll drop the link to that initiative page in the comments, and I'm sure they'd love to hear from you.
How can I contact you, Kat? Do you have an email?
Yes, I'll drop my email in the chat as well.
You where?
I'll add my email in the chat box so you can find it in there.
Where in that chat?
If you look at the bottom of your screen, should be an icon that says chat with a little speech bubble and 3 dots.
Oh, okay.
And that's where,
see.
yeah, I'll put my email address in there for you.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Kat, and thank you, Anatol, for also asking that question and sharing a little bit about the work that you did back in 2014. I definitely want to say that there is this fit here, and I feel like I had also wanted to ask that question of all of you, right? Where is the overlap between deep energy retrofits and new construction? And I feel like some of y'all also alluded to that, right? But what are some of the key connections, Corey, Galen, Kat, that you've seen that are really helpful in envisioning that in creative ways?
I don't know. I guess I could start. I mean, it's worth noting that, of course, in the design challenge, we did invite again applicants to think about a fourth unit. So, you know, you could argue that there's some new construction, you know, either on the side, the back, on the top of an existing triple decker. There's no doubt that this. Perhaps I'm going to offer a couple of disconnected observations, but there's no doubt that you know, integrating electrifying buildings and doing really good air sealing and insulating work is easier in new construction. It's more challenging with existing buildings. I don't know, Kat, do you have anything, or Corey, do you have anything to add to that? I don't know if I quite understand the question, frankly.
Well,
Yeah.
I think, well, from my understanding, I think the integration of existing technology plus retrofitting existing triple deckers, and the next wave I think I would see is subdividing each unit because of the challenges that we have for affordable housing, and utilize that opportunity to make these units even higher efficient buildings, by working with the technologies that we have today in the future Decker. And the future Decker can look like, instead of 3 units, 6 units in the same space. But the challenges that we have with that are, you know, working with the zoning and the ordinance that will take it from which can get in the way of some of the different innovations. But if we work with the city and possibly zoning issues that can be mitigated through dialogue, and hopefully addressing that triple decker and working its way into affordable housing with smaller units, because I find that the housing stock in Boston is oversized in my you know, in my opinion. But coming from the DC, Maryland area, where row houses were much smaller and equally as efficient in when we were transferring them, changing them into affordable, comfortable homes with the proper sealing and insulation that can happen in a home of that size. So utilizing the fact that the standard triple decker is fairly large, and when we go into retrofit the units, open it up to different scales of living in the city. I don't know if that answered the question either, but it's an observation that I've seen of the triple decker here, and I grew up in Boston, you know, so it really is a challenge to see such space not utilizing to the fullest.
Yeah, to your point, Corey, I've always found it interesting because obviously triple deckers, they have the front staircase and the back staircase, so you could preserve sort of independent entryways. And there could potentially be an opportunity to subdivide. And then if you were to add another level on top, then and make it the quad, as Galen likes to call it, and then subdivide that top unit as well, then you suddenly have 8 units. So you've gone from 3 units to 8 all of a sudden. And there is sort of, I think, it's been really exciting for me seeing a lot of I think the city is trying to experiment. There's the compact living policy, which was something that was trying to experiment with sort of smaller spaces in an urban setting. What's exciting about the triple decker in particular is the front back staircase, but also the porches as sort of still allowing shared spaces, even if you might be in separate units. I loved reading through some of the personal stories that were on the Future Decker exhibition online about folks talking about that the porches are big enough where you could have everybody from the building over on one porch. So even if there isn't a backyard porch, is still maintaining communal space. I think that's always a concern when people talk about really tiny apartments, then people feeling isolated because they're all living alone. And maybe the triple deckers sort of emphasis on community is a good way to avoid that.
Yeah, I mean, just two more quick observations on that. It's and agree with everything that Corey and Kat said. It's worth noting it's not just about increasing the number of units, but also the variety and type of units, right? You might want to have some more efficiencies. We do have a need, frankly, for more smaller units. We also have a need for more family-sized units, 3 bedrooms, 4 bedrooms. And you could accommodate that if you begin to reconfigure existing buildings while, again, upgrading their efficiency and energy performance for the 21st century in a way that meets our carbon goals. But it's also important to note that really important synergy between, greater housing density and the simultaneous need to preserve our forested, millions of forested acres across the state, and reducing pressures on development outside of urban areas. And greater density allows us to do that. It allows us to create affordable and healthy living places, spaces for more residents near transit, near places of work, and to preserve those forested areas as important carbon sinks that we'll really need, again, to meet our 2050 net zero emissions goals. So you're kind of checking a lot of boxes by upgrading and reconfiguring triple deckers while preserving the best of what they do offer. And we've kind of referenced that a bit: the porches, the natural light, some of the architectural details, and just their scale and orientation to the street.
Thank you all for that. And I think also in the thread of how we might conduct some of these retrofits, Alex Zink had posed this question of what is the typical pack-back period on retrofitting a triple decker? And yeah, sort of intrigued to also hear about that.
Well, I think that's what we hope to find out with this challenge. And I should have noted that this is the first phase of our effort, which is to surface these replicable, scalable designs. But we don't want to just stop there, right? I mean, a design challenge would be fun, but we need to, get down to serious business here, get down to brass tacks, and actually start doing some retrofits. So we also have our eye on identifying funding, working with our partners at the Department of Energy Resources to identify funding to actually pay for some retrofits in both affordable housing and in market rate housing that are based on either in part or entirely on the designs that are identified in this design competition. So that will allow us to better understand and confirm the energy performance, where I think we're fairly confident. There's a reason why we've invested so much in energy efficiency. It's because we know that it pays back. We have a high degree of confidence that when you insulate a building, there will be less energy use. We have a high degree of confidence that when you install solar panels on your roof, the sun will shine and it will produce electricity and it will reduce your energy costs. We don't know exactly what those retrofit costs will be. So by building out these projects, we'll be able to better understand what those payback periods will be. And again, that is why we've contemplated this additional unit. Certainly there will be many triple deckers and many other existing multifamily buildings where adding a unit is either not feasible, doesn't make sense, too difficult to get around zoning challenges, other barriers. But there may be many where it does make sense. And in those cases, adding an additional unit really changes the project economics in a very exciting way. Which is why we included that track in the design competition. So a long-winded way of saying, Wandy, great question. We don't have an answer yet, but we hope to begin to have some answers after we fund some actual projects.
And we definitely look forward to seeing those outcomes too. Kat, I don't know if you wanted to add something to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're also very excited to see sort of what the cost estimates come out of that are. I think that's been part of the challenge, is that we've started seeing some really great examples from other parts of the world, and some examples in larger housing types, but a little bit less in smaller housing types. That's some of the ongoing work that we're doing with our Department of Neighborhood Development, is trying to figure out, okay, what is it going to look like to retrofit our existing affordable housing? One really neat example, though, that I'm sure a lot of people on the call have heard about before is Energy Sprong in the Netherlands, where what they did is they kind of did an assessment of what it would look like to retrofit a full sort of Dutch townhome. And they were finding that with accounting for all the savings from energy efficiency, they essentially wanted to go in and like stick on exterior paneling and switch out the heating system for a heat pump system, and essentially they figured out a way to do those retrofits in 3 days because it was exterior work, which was pretty impressive. But they found that with that kind of technology, that they had a $10,000 gap even after the energy saving costs, partially because of the technology that they were choosing, partially because of the kind of house that they were choosing. So what other kinds of strategies can we think of to bring costs down? And one of them is aggregation and economies of scale. So what this company was able to do is they were able to work with social housing authorities in the Netherlands in order to aggregate the number of townhomes and be able to sort of get to a couple hundred, a couple thousand homes that they would be doing this sort of switch out for. And they were able to really cut down that gap funding. So the part of what we sort of need to figure out is really get our feet wet and figure out, okay, for a triple decker in Boston, it's a very different kind of housing type. We have the added complication of porches. It's really hard to sort of think about installation from the outside when you have porches and you want to preserve the porch. So we still need to figure out what works for the triple decker in particular, and then understand what the costs are, and understand if there are opportunities then to leverage economies of scale, or what other kinds of innovative financing solutions we can bring in. There's a lot of great programs already out there, but understanding how big that gap's going to be for the triple decker and what kinds of resources we need to figure out how to bring to bear is going to be part of the puzzle.
So I actually have a couple of questions. My first one is, how would you add a unit, I'm assuming on top of the triple decker, since many of them don't have room in the back, when it's impossible to make the stairs meet current code? Also, in terms of, what can we do with the porches, we could always turn them into 3-season porches and enclose them into the new building envelope, create a vestibule outside the front door, and that would be one way to do it. But my bigger concern is the idea that adding a fourth unit will solve some of the, the financing issues. There's no way. You'd have to build 2 entirely new stairs, somehow tack them onto the building, find space for that, just to meet egress.
So those challenges are actually addressed pretty creatively in some of the proposals. That was certainly on our mind when we put that forward. And there are, and in some cases, the overall footprint of the building is altered, but there are some pretty code compliant ways to deal with the egress and other issues in different configurations. And unfortunately, I can't really get into other details because they're part of proposals that were submitted to us. But they'll be public soon, so I invite you to take a look at them.
Did they require a full gut?
No, not necessarily. I mean, some fairly significant reconfiguration in certain parts of the structure, but no, they didn't require a full gut.
So people would have to vacate the entire building now?
There were some options. There were some proposals that involved tenants relocating for a short time. There were other proposals that allowed tenants to remain in place. So there were a variety of proposals and related tenant impacts. And I mean, to your point about this won't work in certain conditions, yes, that's true. That certainly, you know, one observation about this challenge. There's every triple decker is unique, and every site condition is unique, and there will be many of these designs won't work in certain sites, or won't make sense in certain sites, and will only work in certain locations. But fortunately, there's such a wide variety of existing conditions that our hope is that the designs surfaced here, and hopefully designs that are inspired by this competition, will eventually begin to apply to a wide variety, or be applicable to a wide variety of existing triple deckers.
And thank you for posing those questions also. So I am noticing also in the chat that Allison Nash was really interested to hear about workforce development that's focused on deconstruction and reusing materials found in triple deckers or other existing buildings. And I think I'm particularly also really interested in this question because of the intersection of workforce housing that Corey was talking about, and how that was also highlighted in the most recent update of our climate action plan. And so we'll definitely pass that question over to you, Corey and Kat, around, yeah, what are some of the workforce development strategies that you're sort of taking a look at in this sense?
Can you hear me? Okay. Well, one of the easiest ways to approach that scenario is working directly with the providers of the education for the workforce, the new workforce. And what we've been doing was working directly with BFIT and RCC with their existing curriculum and the future curriculum that they have coming. So what, in essence, it does, it's creating that workforce for the future. The workforce, RCC has a program that's going to be released in the spring. It got delayed because of COVID, that addresses smart technology, and they have grants for it as well. So, you know, integrating systems within even smaller buildings to get them more efficient is highly desirable, and creating the workforce that can do that, it's things that are out there and we're working on as we speak, actually. And BFIT as well, Benjamin Franklin Institute of Technology, they have a program starting in January as well that would be geared to the new technologies that we have coming, and how we can integrate that with the work that we do now in renovating triple deckers, not even just triple deckers, but single family housing, and working in conjunction with programs that are existing with in Mass Save as well. So once you have an individual in the house and get the energy retrofit and get all of the different agencies kind of working together, or at least having one focal point that can point everyone to where they need to go, that's the key that we're finding with integrating workforce development and this climate challenge that we face right now.
Yeah, I really appreciate you bringing up sort of the role that Roxbury Community College and Ben Franklin Institute have been playing in this transition. It's been really great seeing the Center for Smart Building Technology really come together. They're offering a lot of fantastic courses, and what I love is that they're also designing it to be sort of they're building out a 2-year degree that's designed then to be stackable with a 4-year degree at Mass Maritime. So they're really trying to make sure that there's sort of a consistent pathway. If you stop after 2 years, if you go on for 4 years, and thinking about what kinds of careers people can get access to afterwards. Some other sort of things that are happening on the education and with our educational partners, Boston Public Schools has vocational education in a couple of its different schools, not just at Madison Park, even though Madison Park has a lot of our excellent programs around weatherization, but there's some other non-vocational schools, non-tech ed schools that have then now have access to carpentry as well. Carpentry is where a lot of really good stuff happens from an energy efficiency standpoint. That's where air sealing is, and air sealing is a huge efficiency opportunity. If you just have a carpenter that knows how to seal in all the cracks well, that's dynamite. Although not dynamite, because we want to keep the building standing and not falling down. Take that back. It's great. So there's a lot of really wonderful things happening on the education side. What we're also hoping is that by sort of developing these new policies, that we're also creating the jobs pipeline for folks. You know, I think that there was an experience after the Recovery Act in 2010, when there was a ton of money that was put towards workforce development and energy efficiency with a promise of good efficiency jobs behind them. But then that funding ran out and there wasn't a sustained demand for efficiency work. And so you had a lot of people that got trained up on these technologies that then had to reconvert to something else because the jobs weren't there. So our hope is that by developing new policy, we're also ensuring that there's a steady jobs pipeline for these folks who are getting trained up. Some of what we're working on, and this was one of we have 18 strategies in the Climate Action Plan update, and this is another one of them, is developing just articulating what our strategy is going to be around workforce development for building decarbonization. So we've been having conversations with our Office of Workforce Development and with partners about sort of the different sort of key obstacles right now and making sure that we're overcoming them. So we've also been doing a lot of building operator certification trainings. That's more for bigger buildings, but once you've made sort of a high performing building, you need to know how to run it. It runs a little differently than sort of your traditional fossil fuel building. So being able to sort of run those buildings really well and make them sing. The other piece is also making sure that we're also enabling MWDBE contractors, so minority and women and disadvantaged business enterprises, to be able to bid on our bigger contracts and be able to do the work. And so that was something where, based on conversations, we found that there was a need there for these businesses to have that support to be able to know how to bid on bigger projects, but the requirements are a little different. And so as they bid on bigger projects, they're going to get more experience. They're going to be able to sort of intervene more confidently in this space. So some exciting work moving. Not all of workforce development and building decarbonization actually talks about the green stuff. Some of the times it's just about how to contract and how to procure and bid on projects. So we're kind of working on a couple of different levels. But generally our hope is that we're building the jobs pipeline, and that we're also creating sort of stories of what it means to work in the green industry. A lot of folks sort of have traditional views of like what these jobs are like. These are really good, high-paying jobs. An electrician can make $40 an hour like very quickly after getting their certification. That's a green job. They're, you know, installing heat pumps, they're installing electric vehicle chargers. A roofer, that's a green job. You're helping put insulation under your roof. A carpenter, that's a green job. A pipe fitter, a steel worker, those are green jobs too. That's where geothermal comes into play. Geothermal is a great technology where you can get sort of all the energy that you need from the earth below us. So it's also a bit of sort of rebranding and rethinking sort of our stereotypes of what these jobs were like, and helping people sort of telling that story so that folks can actually project themselves and see themselves as being part of the climate revolution, is also sometimes working some traditional union jobs. So lots to come there, but we're working on it. We're working on a lot of stuff.
Thanks for also sharing that context, Kat. It's also interesting to hear about how it's all piecing together and how expansive the term green job actually is. Allison, I want to make sure that I do your question justice, and I actually wanted to invite you to share a little bit more context as to the background to your sort of like initial question.
Hi, this is Allison. I'm working with several other BSA architects on material reuse, because there's tons and tons of material that, you know, comes out of a renovation or is in a commercial tenant fit out that could be salvaged. And I've seen an opportunity in smaller cities I've lived in upstate New York, where there have been workforce development efforts specifically around deconstruction, the sensitive removal of materials so they can be reused, reverse nail gun training, carefully taking out insulation. I just see a big carbon problem with just throwing away a lot of the good materials that we have in our buildings. And I'm just wondering if there's cross-pollination, if that's on anyone's mind that's making curriculum, if that's kind of a thought in this area.
I can't speak to any active curriculum, but I'm really glad that you're bringing that up. And I think that there's a great connection point to be made here. There's some other conversations happening around deconstruction and reuse as relates to the city's efforts to go zero waste. So we've actually had, not myself, but another member of my team, Susan Casino, who's our recycling director. She's been having some conversations with the Boston Preservation Alliance, because obviously this is also a really big part of their bailiwick is the greenest building is the building that's already here, and sort of re-emphasizing the importance of deconstruction, material reuse, and adaptive reuse of existing structures. So I think that there's an ongoing conversation, and there's probably some merging that needs to happen at some point. I'm not familiar with any sort of active training programs in this space yet. There is the Boston Building Reuse Center that's based out of Roxbury that does some salvaging of building materials and sort of resale. So there's an existing effort in place in Boston. But as to sort of the integration into labor training practices, I'm less familiar with that piece, but definitely a big area of work there. I know that Portland, Oregon passed an ordinance a few years back mandating deconstruction. And it's also been a conversation that I think has come up in St. Louis. There was a great episode on 99% Invisible podcast about the dollhouses of St. Louis and the bricks getting stolen. There's immense value in these building materials, and it's about capturing that value and making sure that we're preserving that material history. So yeah, my email's in the chat. So if you want to connect, we can help patch together this story.
I agree. It's a really exciting area. Yeah, thanks for raising it, Allison. I assume you're familiar with Boston Building Materials, but that's the reuse center that Kat referenced. But I agree. I think it's an important area. If I had to think about like strategically the best way to approach this, it might be to kind of identify a set of high value reuse materials. I mean, you mentioned insulation. I think that's actually a very intriguing suggestion, but perhaps a few others, and maybe there's some kind of pilot effort around those. I think if you try and tackle everything at once, that can be overwhelming. Also, it's important to note that demolition waste, at least on the larger, the C&I, the commercial and industrial side, there's actually a fairly high percentage of material recycling and reuse, downcycling in the commercial side. I think the real opportunity is in, as I think you're noting, in the kind of small to mid-sized multifamily where people are just filling 30-yard containers and they're going to landfills. And there probably is an opportunity there for certain materials. And that's why I'm suggesting, I wonder if there's a way to kind of focus on a handful of materials and create a market for those. And then, of course, the related training necessary to properly harvest those materials and reuse them.
Thank you. And I just want to say that I'm also grateful to all of you that were able to have conversations in the chat and speak to one another, because I do recognize that being able to do that through Ring Central or Zoom or any of these other platforms can be really difficult if you're just trying to have a chat with somebody. And so wanted to say that please keep this going, and want to again thank everybody for being here tonight. I think that often when we're talking about these sort of technical topics, right, it can be really overwhelming at times. And I just want to say that I'm really grateful for all of you for being incredible storytellers in this space as well, and for allowing us to navigate through this collective journey. I will just share my screen a little bit and once more to share what our next steps will be. And so we have another upcoming event in 2 weeks where we'll be delving into the questions of affordability and triple deckers or future deckers as well. I think that it was really wonderful to sort of hear how that was also embedded in tonight's conversation, because in order to do some of these changes, you really do have to tap into the financial resources that exist. And so if you're able to attend that event, it will be again at 6 p.m. On December 16th. And if you are sort of willing to follow up with us through conversation, these are the emails that you can use to reach us. And once again, thank you to our speakers. Thank you everybody for being here tonight. And we're really grateful to be able to keep this going. And so I will stop sharing my screen here. And thanks again.
Thank you so much for creating this space. This is a wonderful conversation. Really appreciate everybody taking time out of a Wednesday night on a cold December evening to be here with us.
Yeah, thanks. Great to connect
Thank you
with all
all.
of you.
Thank you. Thank you all.